Backpage co-founder Michael Lacey was sentenced to 5 years in prison and fined $3 million for one money laundering count in a case involving allegations of promoting prostitution through ads on that website, Backpage. Now, federal prosecutors had been seeking a 20-year prison sentence for Lacey. In 2019, the Justice Department announced the seizure and takedown of Backpage.com, charging former owners and executives with facilitating prostitution as well as money laundering and conspiracy. Joining us now to discuss this case is senior editor at Reason Magazine, Elizabeth Nolan Brown, my colleague there. Liz, you've been following this case for a long while, and I want the viewers to understand, because we've covered a lot, especially just in recent days and weeks, of efforts by federal bureaucrats internationally in South America and Europe to hamstring X, to hamstring Telegram, the battles on social media sites and their owners because there's some sordid content somewhere accessible on the site. This is actually a really clear case of this happening in the U.S. So tell our viewers what Backpage was and why the owners of the site have been held criminally liable for the speech that appears on it.
Yeah, so I always say that Backpage has been sort of a test case for squelching free speech online. And it was sort of the playbook that they used to figure out how they were later going to go after X, later go after TikTok, later go after all sorts of other companies. Backpage was a classified ad website, much like Craigslist. People could post ads for jobs. They could post ads for couches. There's also a section of the website that was for adult ads. So this was for sex work and legal sex work, things like dominatrixes, things like strippers, things like escorts, which is not illegal. However, sometimes people, would post ads for things that, seemed legal, but were actually then when they would meet up with people, they would engage in prostitution, which is illegal. So that is why the government wanted to shut Backpage down. They said that people were being, engaging in prostitution on there. They said that sometimes people that were minors were being advertised on there or were advertising themselves on there, which would technically be sex trafficking. So they said, instead, even though Backpage was helping the government when this happened, helping them get the people who were actually doing the trafficking, they said that the owners were actually responsible and they wanted to shut it down because they couldn't totally wipe out any sort of bad speech that was on the website.
Yeah, so even in this case, the owners, the founders, the creators of the platform, they did alert law enforcement, as many of these social media companies do. Facebook reports tons of illegal, illicit activity on the platform. But now, the government eventually, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this was prosecuted at some stage, early stage, by Kamala Harris, which is why I thought it was worth talking about. She was involved in this and has bragged about this, actually bragged about it at the DNC, this important test case where she brought a legal charge against the owners who even helped report illicit activity, but because there was anything bad on the platform, one of the founders, I believe, he killed himself facing these charges, and the other was sentenced now.
Yes, so that's right. Not only did they report bad activity, but they were actually there's secret government memos that the prosecutors didn't want to get out that actually got out that talk about how Backpage was more responsive than any other website in this sphere at working with the government. They would testify in court when people were being prosecuted. They would do all of these, they would go above and beyond to sort of help put the bad guys in jail. But obviously, this being a giant user-generated website like Facebook, like TikTok, they couldn't always stop anything bad from getting on the website. So that is why people are going after them, including Kamala Harris, who helped arrest them in 2016 when she was AG of California. She arrested them on pimping charges that were twice thrown out of court. But then the federal government went after them for facilitating prostitution and money laundering. And you're right that one of the men who was the founder of Backpage, Jim Larkin, killed himself last summer before the trial began. And the other one, the other founder, Michael Lacey, was just sentenced. The prosecutors were asking for 20 years, but he was sentenced. The judge ruled to 5 years in prison plus a $3 million fine.
Elizabeth, I don't think it's any secret that stuff like this, it's possible, is happening on Twitter. I mean, it has all of the signs. Many people get those weird DMs. How close do you think we are to there being some kind of retaliation against X and Elon Musk for similar charges?
I think that this has definitely been a playbook where it could be used against X and other social media platforms too. I mean, the reason that they went after them was because even though there's no sex trafficking charges against Backpage, in the press, politicians were constantly saying sex trafficking, sex trafficking, sex trafficking. And then last year, you saw Facebook and Twitter and other social media companies get hauled before Congress and asked about sex trafficking or asked about other things involving minors. So it's definitely always people using the prospect of minors seeing bad content or being exposed to predators on these sites as a pretense sort of to go after free speech more generally on any of them. And I think it's possible that they could go after X, they could go after Meta, they could go after any TikTok, any of these companies.
I wonder if we're about to enter an era of more combative just relations between the CEOs of these companies and the governments. Obviously, Mark Zuckerberg put out a fascinating letter last week saying that he regrets much of the interaction his companies had with the authorities during the pandemic, that they were constantly pushing Facebook social media moderators to take down speech, and that Zuckerberg mostly went along with it, and he now thinks that a lot of that was wrong. A lot of it was wrong having to do with the warnings they got from the FBI about Russian interference, Hunter Biden content. They regret that. Obviously, Elon Musk will have a very combative relationship with the Kamala Harris administration if she does, in fact, win. If Trump wins, he might be in the administration. I don't know. But it looks like the tech giants have had enough of being just accused of these ridiculous things and being asked to violate very fundamental free speech commitments.
Yeah, and you can't blame them. I mean, again, to go back to the Backpage case, some of the evidence that prosecutors have used against them is saying, well, they should have known that prostitution was taking place on the site or that, other bad things were taking place on the site because they reported it to the government. So the very fact that they did what that was the good thing to do, that they did what they were required by law to do, or that they went above and beyond and did what any good person would do and report potential bad behavior to the government, was then later used against them in the court case by saying, well, they reported it, which means they knew that it was happening. So they should have just shut down the whole website. But that was the prosecutor's argument. They should have just shut it all down because they knew, and they knew we knew because they told us. So it's really disincentivizing any of these tech companies to report things to the government because that could later be used against them in court.
So have you, in your research and looking into this story, found any examples of cases where this happened in the physical world? For example, a Walmart parking lot being a hub for prostitution. Just a quick online search pulls up a lot on this. Are there any comparisons you found, not online, of companies or businesses being sued for something similar?
There are actually. There's been a wave of recent lawsuits against hotels that saying that the hotels knew prostitution was taking place in their hotel rooms and didn't stop it. And there's been none of them have been successful yet, but there's been a big push to hold the hotels liable when prostitution happens at them. And I think that we're really seeing, it's an attack on intermediaries, right? Instead of going after the actual people who are breaking the law, or if there's sex trafficking happening, instead of going after the actual traffickers, the people who are committing violence, committing crimes, people want to hold these intermediary spaces, whether that's an online space or that's a physical space like a hotel, accountable. And I don't think that's right. I think that distracts from the actual issue, which is like, we should be going after the people who are committing the crime. We should not be going after these, whether they're online or physical spaces that are just merely conduits to that activity.
Yeah, I keep saying, would Verizon going to get criminally liable if the bank robbers are talking on their cell phones? Is Ford in trouble if the getaway car is a Ford? I mean, at some point, this just gets utterly ridiculous. And we have important...
If a dating site, if someone meets up and there's, God forbid, a sexual assault or something, I mean, that's the logical conclusion is holding so many more things accountable for things that they have no control over.
Yeah, which is exactly what many bureaucrats in the federal government want to do, because this is a tool to shut down speech that they don't like. Elizabeth Nolan Brown, thank you so much for joining us. Viewers really should check out her writing at Reason.com for Reason Magazine about this case. It's fascinating and very undercovered. Thanks so much, Liz.
Thank you. I'll sorry my light was